Welcome to the Branding Room Only podcast, where we share career stories, strategies, and lessons learned on how industry leaders and influencers have built their personal brands. Now, let's get started with the show. Hi, everyone. It's Paula Edgar, the host of Branding Room Only, and I'm going to be excited throughout today's conversation because it is with my friend, Nina Blackshear. Let me tell you about her. She is owner and principal of Nina Blackshear Coaching and Consulting. She's a certified executive coach and in-house corporate attorney whose love language is helping others discover their superpowers. Her specialties include impostor syndrome, entrenched perfectionism, and the burnout that results from constant striving. In her practice, she works with successful and high-potential professionals to overcome limiting beliefs, remove obstacles, and supercharge their confidence so they can achieve outrageous levels of success. I'm here for outrageous levels of success. Nina, welcome to the Branding Room.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation today.
So am I. And for those of you who are listening and not watching, jump on over to YouTube because Nina is wearing a fabulous purple dress, which has a cape on it. And I'm loving it because she told me she did that because my brand color is purple. So she's already doing my love language and supercharging my confidence. So it's all good.
I know the rules, Paul. I know the rules.
Tell me this. How would you describe a personal brand? What does it mean to you?
Personal brand is how you show up and what you're known for, right? How people remember you when you're not in the room. I think it's just as important as what they see when you are in the room. I think it's about how you convey what's important to you, what's aligned with your core values, and how you make people feel after they've had an interaction with you.
What an awesome description. I love that, particularly the feeling part, right? It's like that Maya Angelou quote, people remember how you made them feel. And while I know this to be true, it's often not put in a definition, right? So I love that you call that out because it's so true. Well, tell me this. How would you describe yourself in 3 words or short phrases?
I would say confident. I would say authentic. And I would say kind. And kind is not one that I might have used 10 or 15 years ago. So I'm proud of that one.
Okay. All right. Here's the kindness. Do you have a favorite quote or motto?
I do. It's a quote that goes, I have it in my email signature, and it says, see the light in people and treat them as if that is all you see.
Oh, that's a good quote. I needed to receive that right this exact moment. I need to hear that
I'm
reminder.
glad this is right on time for you.
The
Paul.
message is so on time. So, and I appreciate that as a thing. I just needed a moment to think about that because these days. But anyway, to that end, do you have a hype song when they're going to get full Nina coming into the room? What is playing in your head?
Yeah, so I actually have a full, I call it the Goddess Nina playlist. So it is sort of like my theme songs. Like if I was in a movie and something was playing and I'm bopping along the street, I've got songs that definitely get me there. Yes. Some of them are safer for work than others. But I would say for me, probably the best one is Soulmate by Lizzo.
Oh.
Have you heard this one, Paula?
I think so something came to mind as soon as you said it, but I also have a DJ in my head, so it could be a remix or some other song that I'm putting towards Lizzo, but
there.
I will make sure I find it and so I can listen to it. Is there a specific message in it that resonates for you?
Yeah, it's basically I'm my own soulmate. And it's basically the whole song is her hyping up like, you're amazing, you're a catch, you're your own catch. Yes. So, treat yourself to you first before you look externally for validation. And I love that message that we're enough by ourselves. And yeah, we can join forces with others and augment and complement, but I'm not looking to anybody to complete me. I am complete all by myself. And the reason it might sound actually familiar to you, I attended your very wonderful workshop at the beginning of the year, sort of the goal setting, intention setting workshop. And I think at the end of that, maybe you ask for people to
so it's
add.
Thank you for reminding me.
Your playlist of confidence.
In the playlist, exactly. Yes. So, yes. Okay, yes. So one of my favorite things to do, all of you know this, is just to play that random playlist because it goes from hip hop to gospel to country to rock. It spans all of that, and I play it on randoms because I never know what's going to come out. And so I do know the song, and thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So tell me about how Nina started. Like, where did you grow up and how do you think that shaped your brand?
Yeah, so I am a Philly girl, although I guess if you get really, really technical, I was born in Boston. I know. Okay. if you're from Philly, like that's a problem. But my parents are both from Philadelphia. They were just up there. My dad was in school. So I was only there for a year, came back. So really Philly born and bred. Then for my dad's job, we did a stint in upstate New York, which
Okay.
was interesting and, maybe a different environment. Let's just say that. But then we came back down to Philly.
Mhm.
And so I think that, coming up in Philly, we have a sort of a city brand, right?
Yes.
We are bold, we are audacious. Some people would call us rude. We love with our whole hearts. We also detest with our whole hearts.
Yes.
So it can be a little all or nothing here in this city, especially when it comes to our sports teams. But
Yes.
but
Go
but what
Birds.
but what I have heard and what I take a lot of pride in being from Philadelphia, and I try to carry this through, is that people go to other parts of the country and they just have a hard time if they're not from there, sort of getting into the scene, feeling like they're accepted. Like everybody's very polite, but
Mhm.
not really feeling like they've integrated in. And
Mhm.
people say, even though Philadelphians are tough, when you come here and you've kind of made some inroads, then we sort of embrace you with our whole hearts, whether you like it or not, in a huge bear hug. So I try to carry that through the rest of my life. So it's shaped, I think, my confidence level. I think it shaped the amount of nonsense that I'm willing to put up with
Mhm.
or not, as the case may be. And also, understanding that good or bad, I want to be authentic.
I love that, and it is a city of brotherly love. So you're gonna get loved.
And
And so,
sisterly affection. That's right.
and so that's interesting because I don't think I realized that about you, that you were a Philly raised, and so I'm a Brooklyn girl. Everybody knows this. It is the heart of my brand. And when I was away at boarding school, my parents moved to South Jersey. So South Jersey is very Philly-esque. It's not New
Mm-hmm.
York. It's Philly. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Jersey has to decide about whether it's going to be Philly or New York, and South Jersey is definitely Philly. And
Because they know it's good for them.
I
Yeah.
mean, here it is what it is. I have to say that what you said resonated, particularly about. I think that people from Philly are straight shooters. Like you don't that authenticity about them is refreshing, and again, sometimes it's challenging, but refreshing for the most part. And I love that Philly has its own language. Like I was like, what is John? I don't know what that even means, but
It's so many things, Paula. It's
exactly.
so many things.
It is so many things. It can be used in so many. It's a versatile. It's flexible. It's fantastic. And so when you're saying that the Philly has its own brand, that is so very very true. So very true.
Yeah, I love it.
So tell me about from growing up in Philly to your education and career journey.
Yeah. So, again, went to in Philly and then ended up going to Virginia for college and for law school. Needed to be far enough away from home that they really had to think about it before they were popping up on anybody, right? So just create a little bit of space. So went to the University of Virginia for both
Mhm.
and went straight through. I went to law school, and anybody who's heard me speak anywhere knows this already. Like, I went to law school because I didn't know what to do after undergrad, right? I had this liberal arts multidisciplinary degree in political and social thought. I wasn't getting a job with that, right? So everybody had always said, "Oh, you're so verbal. You'd make a great lawyer. You're, great debater. Okay, I'll go to law school, I guess." So I just sort of defaulted into it, right? And almost all lawyers know, right? When you go to law school, it gets kind of grim halfway through. Like it's a slog, right? And I think you need to know why you're there. You need to know what your shining purpose is so you can latch on to that when it gets tricky in the middle. And I just didn't have that.
Mhm.
So halfway through, I was like, this sucks. I don't want to do it. Like, I just don't want to do this. I don't want this to be my job.
Mhm.
And I made a very, very hard pivot. So I decided I was the social committee chairperson for the Black Law Students Association. So I planned a lot of events for us. And I thought,
Shout out to Balsa.
but yes, shout out to
Mhm.
Balsa,
Yes,
which is where I specifically direct my contribution every year when I give back to the
love
University
it.
of Virginia Law School. But yeah, I just thought, oh, I really like this. This is great. I'm going to be an event planner. I mean, like a hard pivot, right?
That is
So
a
I
pivot.
didn't do a second summer at a firm.
Mhm.
I went and worked at the Pennsylvania Convention Center in their event services department for like $12 an hour. Like, we're doing something else. But I
Uh-huh.
knew I wanted to finish school. I knew I wanted to take the bar. I didn't want to have debt for nothing. So I'm on my plan. I graduate. I'm doing the bar stuff. Fine, fine, fine. And as
Mhm.
more acutely
Mhm.
than others, I
Mhm.
graduated in 2001.
Mhm.
So in
Mhm.
that fall, 9/11 hit,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And it hit some of us much harder than it hit
Yeah.
others, right?
Yeah.
But what it meant for me was that it was a very somber time, rightfully so, in the country.
Mhm.
people weren't having events, people weren't throwing parties, right? So I
Mhm.
was now just sort of home off the planned career track, sitting in my parents' basement, like wondering what was going to happen
Right.
next. And I
Mhm.
reached out to a mentor. She said, maybe dip your toe back in. What about clerking, right? And whenever I tell this story, people who've gone to law school are like, it's not that easy to get a clerkship, right? Like, why did she think that was the thing you were going to dip your toe back into the law? And I realize how preposterous it sounds. But it actually worked out because she put me in touch with a judge in the Superior Court of Delaware. And just as I went to have just sort of an informational convo with him, his clerk, who was doing a second term, got a job and had just given notice.
Oh,
So all he saw was warm legal body coming through the
right.
door, and he did not want any interruption in the
Thanks so
support.
much.
Yeah, yes,
Gotcha.
welcome to the team. Come on in. We've saved a seat for you. So actually, I just sort of, again, like sort of stumbled into this clerkship, right?
Mhm.
And I did that so the rest of his term, then my own term. So I thought, I could do this. I could get back into the law, right? But I was interviewing at law firms, and because I'd stepped off that very traditional track, they just didn't know what to do with me, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I'd had a taste that it's not what you do in the law may not be what you learned in law school, and those things aren't necessarily the same. So it
Right.
seemed a little more exciting, but I just couldn't get sort of tracked back in. It's such a conservative profession, and it was then as well, right? So I had to pivot, and I thought, okay, what else can I do with this law degree? And in Pennsylvania, you can sit for the real estate exam without taking real estate classes if you are a barred attorney. Yeah. So I was
Mhm.
like, all right, going into real estate. So did you write that down? You were like, let me tell my people. So
Yes.
I went into real estate. I did that for a couple of years, and it was fine. It was interesting. The money's very up and down, right? Because
Yeah.
you're working on commission. I was, getting married. I was buying a house. I needed something more stable.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting a contract attorney job, so doing doc review,
Mhm.
which
Fun.
yeah, so much fun. And they treat you really, really well when you're a doc reviewer. So shout
This
out
is
to all
this
my
is sarcasm, y'all.
yes, yeah, yes. In case you can't see me and you're just listening, that is
Right.
sarcasm. So shout out to all my doc reviewers out there. I know, that is not an easy gig.
No.
So did that for a couple years. But while I was there, my dad had worked at a pharmaceutical company for a very long time. And
Mhm.
some people that I knew there reached out and said, hey, we're standing up this new function called employee relations in HR. We think with your legal background, you might be kind of a good fit. Do you want to interview? So I was able to sort of transition into this pharma company doing HR, like doing employee relations. And I always tell people, in case you don't know, employee relations is when you're doing, internal investigations, sexual harassment, discrimination, policy violations, all that stuff, people
Mhm.
stealing, off their expense card. You always have the most interesting stories at cocktail parties when you do employee relations, or if you're an employment lawyer, right? You guys have,
Facts.
we have the
Because
greatest
that's what I
stories.
practice. I'm like,
Yes, so
when I write my book,
right?
it's
Yes,
over. Yeah.
you have the coolest stories. But it also means if your phone is ringing, it's probably not great news. Nobody's calling the employee relations person with an amazing story, like something's gone terribly wrong. So
Yeah.
after, several years of doing that, I was like, I just want to do something else. So I did two special projects in marketing communications at that company on top of
Mhm.
my regular job
Okay.
and was able to kind of transition over into the business side. And so I did marketing communications for several years, working on a number of their different drug franchises. And so that was a really good experience for me because working on the business side, I'm now working across the table from lawyers, and
Mhm.
some of them were very helpful, and some of them were not so helpful. And so I think it actually helped me later in my career as I kind of transitioned back into the law to say, well, what kind of lawyer do I want to be when I'm working with the business? I want to be somebody who partners, who takes another beat and says, hey, let's talk this through. Come see me. We'll find another 15 or 20 minutes. Not the person who says, no, it's wrong. Come back next week. Too bad. We don't care if
Right.
your marketing team is going to scream at you because you didn't get it, through our review process. So,
Right.
all right. So then I'm at Merck. Sorry, this is my
No,
twists and
go. I
turns,
mean, it's
Paula. It's a
fascinating.
lot.
All these pivots are fascinating. So
Yes.
please go.
So I'm at Merck. I'm doing this job, and again, as I said, I did two special assignments on top of my job. So this is a job I wanted,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
When I really got into it, it is legit like the worst job I ever had. It was like a constant high speed hamster wheel. Like just to take like a couple of days off required so much prep and like handing things off to people and just trying to keep this endless cycle of review and submission and review and submission and 5 days ahead going. It was relentless.
Wow.
And I was miserable. And I was also working in a very toxic environment
Mhm.
where I felt like I had to sort of pretend a lot. to
Which
fit
is so,
in.
which is so heavy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like to fit in, to get noticed, to move
Yeah.
ahead. And I talk to people, about this constant striving. You sort of mentioned that, but like these blinders you get on when you're in an environment and you think this is the only place you can work and you have to make it work here. So you
Mhm.
start compromising your own values, right? You start doing things that are a little bit iffy for you because you think, but that's what it takes to make it work here. And you forget like there's other places you can go, right? So I was miserable and we were going through, our 100th round of layoffs and my number came up. My job got eliminated. And so
Mhm.
I got severance. I got to take 6 months off
Yes.
with money.
Mhm.
And it was amazing. So many people don't get a chance ever to take a break.
Right.
And it was imposed upon me, but it was like the best thing that ever happened. I was able to sort of like heal, get over some
Mhm.
of like the PTSD from being in what I realized was like a really abusive work
Traumatic. Yeah.
situation.
Mhm.
And so I ended up connecting with somebody who used to work at that company, and she was doing fundraising for Temple University here
Mhm.
in Philly. And she said, "Oh, you should come and try this." And I was like, I don't have any fundraising experience." And she's like, you can learn it. It's no big deal." So we Googled, and she sent me some stuff, and I figured it out. And there was a job, and I interviewed, and I beat 30 people out for a job for which I had zero experience.
Wow.
See that, and that's part of when I work, especially with lawyers and as a
Mhm.
coach, we take for granted how quickly we can assimilate very large amounts of
True.
information, right? We're
True.
trained that way.
Yes,
And
it's
we
true.
assume everybody can do that. Not
Mhm.
everybody can do that,
No, not even
right?
some lawyers can do that. But
Right. Right. Exactly. But what it does is it means that you can in a weekend,
yeah.
you can get really good at talking about something
Yes.
that you might not have had, previous experience around. So that's sort of what I did. So I did that. I was covering the West Coast. I was going out on visits once a month on the West Coast and meeting with donors. And this is where I really developed my EQ. I'm sorry, I'm not letting you ask any questions, Paula.
No, no,
Jump
please.
in wherever you
Don't you worry. I'm gonna be ready. I am literally sitting here riveted hearing all of the pivots and all of the trust that has been put in you for people being like, you could absolutely be an astronaut. You can such raining schmaining. You can do it all. I mean, and I think that says a lot about your brand. So I love hearing this. So keep
Okay,
going.
I'm going to leave it to you to tie. I know you'll tie it together with a beautiful
Yes.
bow.
Hmm.
So I'm going out, I'm meeting with people that I've never met before for like 30, 45 minutes. And at the end of that, I am expected to ask them basically for $50,000, right? So like you better build rapport quickly, right? Like your
Yes.
EQ better shoot through the roof. And that's
Hmm.
where I really was able to hone. I think I had some of that raw talent from an
Yeah.
EQ perspective, but really hone that. And I found that people in those short conversations, first of all, they would extend longer than we had planned, right?
Mhm. Always a good sign.
And people would say, and I'm sure you get this a lot too,
Mhm.
they would always say, "I don't know why I'm telling you all this.
Yes.
I never talk about myself like this, but there's just something about you that makes me feel like I want to like tell you all the things, right?"
Mhm. Mhm.
And I took that very seriously. That's a real privilege for people to feel like they can let their guard down
Agreed.
and be open with you, right? So I just sort of filed that away. Like, what does that mean in terms of, what I should be doing out in this world, like what my purpose is? But I didn't
Mhm.
really know where it fit in.
Mhm.
So I did that for a couple of years. And then between the pharma company and working at Temple, I'd met a lawyer who was at another pharma company. And I met her at like a job fair where I was looking for a job on the business side. And she said, "Oh, but you're a lawyer. What do you do? What's all this stuff you're doing?" And I was like, "That's all in the past." She's like, "I don't know. It's not what you hated in law school. Like, maybe we'll bring you back to the dark side." So right. So we kept in touch. She moved to another company and she reached out and she said, "Listen, I know that you don't have like the technical, piece of this. I can teach you that, but I need somebody with good EQ. I need somebody with confidence. I need somebody who's not going to get steamrolled by these clients who are very legally resistant that we're going to be supporting in this business. So
Mm.
if you're ready, like, come on." And so I came on and I worked there for 6 years and then came to my current company, also followed her here eventually. And
Love it.
yeah, yeah. So then the coaching thing came up, in terms of talking to friends and always giving them advice, but realizing I had really created codependence when they were like, "Oh, I need your help. I need your help. I need your help. I'm glad I got you. I don't know what to do." And I thought, I want you to be, I'm giving you advice so you can be confident on your own. And I
Right.
started looking into coaching and realizing this was really the modality to give people confidence in themselves to be able to navigate their own lives.
It's such a powerful thing to have people trust in you. And so I'm gonna pull everything together in the story of Nina, which is that my takeaway is that when you're uncomfortable, the wind is going to push you or pull you to the next thing that's going to give you the next thing that you need on your path. And I love that you did something that a lot of people, I think, are resistant to, which is you say yes.
Mm.
Right, that you were willing to trust in yourself and their trust in you for those things to combine to be whatever the next step was going to be. And there's not a lot of people who I think can do that well, right? So if you were just like, hey girl, hi, nice to see you, can I $50,000? I'd be like, okay, bye. And clearly but and because I did fundraising years ago, that is definitely a skill. For all the things you just mentioned, for me, that's the hardest one, because you're getting people to give up something
Yeah.
consistently. And that relationship, that rapport, that EQ that you talked about is so key. And it just brought up a question for me that I actually made this comment yesterday during a presentation. And I want to hear what your thoughts are. So I said, EQ is easy to understand when someone doesn't have, but
Mm.
hard to teach them how to have.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am willing to be wrong in that. I hope that I'm wrong, because I want people who don't necessarily have it to gain it, right? But do you think of it as a muscle that can be built?
Oh, 100%.
Tell me more about this. I want to.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I
okay.
absolutely do think it's a muscle that can be built.
Mhm.
The thing is, people want to skip to like have EQ. Have
Mhm.
EQ is sort of a destination, right? Think of that as a destination. And yes, it is a building block to other things. But if you think of it as a destination in of itself, what are the building blocks that get you there, right? And I would say the first one is having an open mind. Right.
Mhm.
So people who can't understand or don't have the self-awareness, right? Self-awareness is a piece of it too, to know that this is a place where maybe they struggle,
Yeah,
are never going to get there, right? Because you have to be able to admit that there's a gap,
right.
right? It's
Right.
like asking, people always say, oh, I don't want to work for a micromanager. What do I do? And I'm like, there's nothing you can do. You have to rely on your spidey senses, because you will ask any manager, are you a micromanager? And all of them are going to tell you
I'm
no,
gonna say no.
right?
Yeah.
Because the
Mhm.
ones who aren't truly aren't. And
Right.
the ones who are don't have enough self-awareness to know that they're micromanagers. So you're never going to get a good answer on that, right?
Mhm.
You've got to discern that for yourself. So I think it's the same thing. You've got to see openness, you've got to see self-awareness, you've got to have people who are willing to admit that they don't know everything, right? People who are willing, as you just said, willing to admit that they might be wrong
Mhm.
about something. People who are willing to unpack. We talk a lot when I'm coaching about people's inner voice, right? Like the voice in your head,
Mhm.
and how that voice sounds like you. It talks like you. It sounds like this.
Mhm.
But when you really think about it, maybe you just morphed it into sounding like your voice. Where did that message really come from? Did it come from a parent? Did it come from, a cultural background, right? Did it come from a religious, affiliation, whatever it is? What did you just sort of wholesale swallow and adopt?
Yeah.
And when you really think about it, you think, I'm not sure I truly believe that, right?
Okay, so I love that reflection on it. I'm glad I asked you the question, because I kind of said the statement that I made out of frustration, because I used to tell this joke when I was giving presentations. I would say, if I was going to write a book, it'd be called Be Self-Aware, but nobody would buy it.
Because everyone's like, well, I am. What do I need
Right,
that? What do I need that
right.
for?
And that's how I think about EQ. So your point about building the building blocks of EQ makes a lot of sense for me, and I hope for my audience to understand it a little bit more, because I think in a totality, you can't just get it. But you can understand those building blocks that lead towards it, and it makes it easier to get when people don't have it, because it's usually one of those core pieces that they need for you to be able to receive them as having it as well. And so I really love that kind of breakdown of it, particularly the self-awareness piece. It's where I find that it's like I can't give you self-awareness. It's literally
Yes.
it's yours, it's self-awareness.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. And so
yeah,
I would say for like an organization or a
yeah,
corporation, right,
yeah.
who's looking to develop a leader who maybe is lacking in the EQ department,
Mhm.
right, saying, okay, is this a person who's willing to have some self-awareness that there are some gaps, who's willing to admit? Because I think if you can't even get that far, you're far away from developing EQ in this person. And so you might need to really evaluate whether or not this person is a good fit long term for the culture that you're trying to build.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that response. And so thinking about your laying out of your career, and I have to say, you probably have gave the most robust, actually, no, Paula Boggs did, because Paula Boggs was like, and then I was in the White House. I was like, oh my gosh. Anyway, anyway, add that to the show notes because everybody should listen to that one too. So it's the power of the pivot that really resonates for me. And I think that because no matter when anybody's listening to this episode, there's always a pivot that has experienced or maybe are about to experience. And ease in the pivot is not always there. Let's put it that way, right? Like when someone's laid off.
Rarely. It is rarely there.
Exactly. People just don't love change the way I want them to, but they don't. And yet we are always experiencing change. It's the only thing that is constant. And so that is how I connect this piece of everything to branding, because your brand is never static. You can say your brand is strong. Absolutely. But is it the same? My brand is not the same as it was 6 months ago, right? And it should shift as you learn and you grow, et cetera. And so I want to talk a little bit about how you work with clients. You talk about giving them the power to write their own story. You and I are both women of color. I'm specifically thinking about how you would address women of color in their ability to write their own story and the struggles that we know exist when we try to write our own stories in places where the pages may be blank, but they don't want us to write. Right. So tell me a little bit about your work with the folks, clients in those spaces, and what you would recommend.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tricky, right? Everything about being a woman of color is a tricky balancing act all the time, right? And at some point, you just have to decide how much of that you still want to do and what kind of spaces you still want to operate in, right? So I think, again, with those blinders that can kind of get in, or even in a, like let's say in a profession, right? And I know your audience is wider than, lawyers, right? And I obviously coach people in all kinds of industries, but law's a really good example of like not a lot of great things, right? Unfortunately. So I think, for lawyers who come up in a very sort of rigid, narrow space, right? It's just not, it's built in us to conform, right? It's built in us to, you do this and then you do this and then you do this. There's a formula for how you approach your career. There's a formula for how you show up. There's a formula for what an executive or a partner or whatever it is, looks like. And I think at some point you have to decide, again, like listening to that voice, do you subscribe to that or did you just swallow that? Right? Or have you been doing it because it's, quite frankly, it's just been a survival tactic? And no shade to that, right? People have to feed their families, right? We all put up with things that we don't love, right? In order to, make sure we can put food on our table and keep a roof above our heads.
Preach.
But how much of that are you willing to do?
Right.
Right. And so I think for women of color, it is extra tricky. And it's, and certainly when you start compounding that with other, dimensions, right, of people's makeup, right, it gets harder and harder and harder. That's just, those are, no matter what anybody says these days, those are just facts. So I would say really getting in touch with who you are, what's important to you, what your core values are, right? And then examining how you're operating in your current environment, whatever that current environment is, whether it's personal or whether it's professional. I mean, I'm an executive coach, so I focus a little bit more on the professional side, right? Yeah. So when you think about where you're working and what you're being asked to do, how much of that feels like it is clashing with your core values, right? It's never going to be 100, very rare to get 100% match with your core values and where you are, right? Nothing.
Unless you have your own business.
Right, exactly. And then then you truly are writing your own story, right? When you have your own business. But if that's not, if you're parapreneuring it, or that's not an option at the moment, just trying to align yourself as closely as you can, or carving out space even within a greater environment to create a space where you can have it align more closely to your own values. Sometimes sometimes a department is a place where you feel, okay, this resonates with me, even though company-wide, maybe it's not like the greatest fit. I report to a leader who I truly respect, whose vision I can buy into, and who makes me feel, included and like I belong here. That can be it too. But yeah, it's not easy. And I do think also, if you decide it's not the right environment for you, being really strategic about how you approach a move, a pivot, an exit, a next chapter. Coaching can help with that, right? Your kitchen table board of directors, your girlfriends, and that they can help with that, so just making sure you're also leveraging those resources.
And I love that piece of advice, because I started off my career as #Coach Paula after I stopped practicing. And I loved it because I was I was so passionately intertwined with the people who I was coaching. It was our success as opposed to just their success. That can also be very draining. So to that end, when you just said make sure you're tapping into resources, which could be a coach, which could be your personal board of directors, et cetera, I want to double click on that because I do think that it seems sometimes so low, right? So like you're so alone, and remembering that you have a squad, and that sometimes I always go, I have my paid squad, and I have the squad that just comes with me.
Yeah.
But I got some squads to make sure that my success story is one that I continue to write. And I think that as women of color, we are often told so often to just take all the things on our backs and figure it out, as opposed to leveraging those resources to make sure that we are not alone. And to the other point about your point about knowing when it's right to leave. I can tell you right now, everybody listening, if you heard any of my podcasts, pretty much I say this all the time. God, whatever the source, whoever you believe in, makes me literally uncomfortable in every seat I am where I have a W-2, period. And that is a challenging space for me, because I then had to realize, hey, the world is saying you got to do your own thing, but that is a very scary thing. And I'm not saying to people, okay, if you feel uncomfortable, go get your own gig. But also, if you want to, please do. But I am saying no, to your point, Nina, when enough is enough.
Yeah.
When enough is enough. We take on too many things. And your point about us being so in this space where we think there's no other option, I have to conform, that hit me really hard in thinking about so many people who I've worked with and myself, that you think there's no other chance, but there's always somebody else. There's always something else. It may be challenging, but it always is. It always something else. I promise you. So, all right.
And more than people think too. I just think that there's more opportunity. It's not like, hey, work this W-2 that you hate, or start your own gig with no safety net, right? Like there's stuff in between. And again, we go right from I have a cushy life to I'm going to be living in my car. Like there's a lot of in between. There's a lot of in between.
Right, exactly. You can live in the foyer. I'm just kidding. Anyway. So we started talking about this a little bit, but I want to come into this a little bit more. Conformity and code switching and all of the things that people need to do to kind of stay in spaces. And a lot of my listeners are lawyers, but to that end, I think this happens everywhere where you are not your own boss, right? You have to and even sometimes when you are, in order to get the clients that you may want, you have to pivot and conform and do some things you may not want to do. What do you think is the key to being able to have the confidence to lead and to work authentically?
Again, I mean, it all kind of goes back to you have to know yourself, right? Like know thyself, right? Like that's a big tenet of authentic leadership and showing up authentically in lots of different spaces, right? Yeah. So if you don't know who you are, there's no chance you're showing up authentically in any kind of spaces, right? And you're not going to feel confident about it, right? So you're certainly not going to feel confident about showing up authentically in a way that sort of swims against the current a little bit, right? So you need to do the work first to figure out who you are, what's important to you, and ground yourself in that. What are your non-negotiables, right? And then figure out how you're going to step confidently in that direction, right? Only then will you have the confidence and the courage to go out and do the next scary thing, which is say, this is how I'm going to show up. This is how I'm going to lead. It's a bit of a take it or leave it, right? And yes, we are women of color, but we're also women. Yeah. Right. And there is, for a lot of women, whether they like to admit it or not, it's sort of inculcated, at least in our culture, to be a little bit of a pleaser. Right. So you, as confidently as you may think or speak or try to lead or try to show up, for many of us, there's still that little thing in the back that has you, softening the way that you write the email and this, that, and the other. Right. Yeah. And men don't think about that. Right? Ever.
It's true. Tis so true.
Right? So I think, that is, you have to understand who you are, what's important to you, get grounded there. And then you can say, okay, now that's unshakable. So now I am able to step forward and say, this is how I want to show up here and this is how I want to lead. You guys like it? You don't like it? I'm not, this isn't about pleasing. I want to get along. I want to collaborate. I want to keep it collegial, but I'm not going to bend myself into a pretzel to make you comfortable.
So when you have clients, how do you get them to know their non-negotiables, to understand their values? Are you using, I don't know, what are all the letters, ELFDP, whatever the numbers, the letters are that people use?
Was that your Myers-Briggs reference?
Yeah, I'm like, what? Yeah, exactly. I'm like, is that an elephant? I don't know what I am. All I know is that I'm the loud one. It is
All I know is that Oprah and I are the same, whichever
exactly
one, right?
correct.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Those things.
So not really, right? I
Okay.
mean, for me, it's really, quite frankly, for a lot of people, it's just that they have not had a safe, quiet,
Mhm.
set aside space to even think about it in a really, really long time,
Yeah.
right? So the fact that this is for a lot of my clients, actually at the very beginning, they're almost a little bit uncomfortable because it is a whole like hour where we're just talking about them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's it. Your thoughts, your feelings, what's coming up for you, your hopes, your dreams. And especially for women, they're like, and they want to talk about nope, we're talking about you. Like, I got to bring them back, right? So I
Yeah.
think for a lot of them to understand what that is, it's just getting comfortable with having this like space where we can just talk about them and they can sit and they can think. Nobody's interrupting them, right? I am very comfortable with silence. So take all the time you need. I'm not going to jump in and fill it.
Mm-hmm.
Work through it. That's what this space is for. That's what you're, listen.
Yeah.
Let me
Payment for it.
right. Let me tell you. Let me warn your audience. I am not inexpensive. Okay, so you
As
are
well, you
yes,
shouldn't be.
right. Yes, exactly. Free is definitely canceled, but I am not inexpensive. But that
Mm-hmm.
is what you're paying for, and I've heard from client after client like
Yeah.
that in itself is worth its weight in gold. Is just having a space where they can just think, not
Yeah.
be interrupted, really get to the root of what they want and
Yeah.
what's important for them.
Yeah. So I am a big fan of coaching, not just as someone who used to coach, but also someone who I have several coaches myself, because I understand the power of having, I call coaching a foot in your back. It's a paid foot in your back.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you still have to be the one doing it, but a little prompt and somebody to be like, hey, did you do the thing? And it is a powerful thing when you actually can focus on yourself. But it is scary to your point. And I do find, and I wonder what you think about this, a lot of people spend a lot of their lives lying to themselves
Oh yeah.
until they get to a place where it's just you, them, and themselves. It's like, hey, do you think that's true? Because remember last week when you said XYZ thing? And I find it's a little bit of therapizing. I hate that. And a lot of bit of being like, hey, is this what you want for yourself? And I'm calling this out because I think what I want people to understand is number one, how great you are at coaching, but also to understand not to be scared of it, right? To be that there's much more power in the getting it, doing it, and making it work for you than there is in the not doing it at all. I do believe in outsourcing some of the things that we find hard for ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree,
Mm.
110%. And just right. It's not scary,
Yeah.
but it's also not for a lot of people, to your point, it's not easy because they are used to telling, and I call them like these little lies. They just sort of accrete. They don't feel like lies even when you're saying them,
Yeah.
right? But they are. They're not authentic to who you actually are. And whether it's out of fear or out of trying to mask something or trying to impress somebody, a lot of people do it a lot of the time. And but you can, again, that is a muscle that can be built or a habit that can be broken, a lying
Mm.
habit that can be broken.
I love that. So because of what you do, I'm sure that you also see people making some mistakes. And I would love to hear some of your reflections about places where you've seen people make personal branding mistakes and how it's sort of shown up, and maybe how you've helped them to navigate the fallout of the mistakes that they might have made, or anything that you want to cover in that space, because it's all the things you need. That part,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. I think where I've seen people make the most mistakes is again when they're not being true to who they are. They're sort of putting on a costume of what they think it means to be something, right? Be a leader, right? So they've got this sort of picture in their mind of what it is to be a leader and what those characteristics are. And do I think that there are some good core characteristics of a leader? Of course I do. But do I
Mhm.
think that there is like literally a baked cookie cutter template of exactly, check these 6 things off and you're a leader? No, I don't. So I think where I've seen people make the most mistakes is where they're sort of trying something on that doesn't feel right to them, but they think this is the only way to be successful. I have to be just like everybody else who's come before me. And I mean, you may see some measure of success. You probably won't be very happy. So I don't know, depends on what your definition of success is, right? To me, happiness is a is a component of that. So I think, coaching people again, getting back in touch with, let's talk about what's really important to you, right? That sort of, again, that constant striving thing, sort of the hard hitter, the hard charger, right? Again, in law, very common. I saw it in the business side when I was working in pharma, very, very common, just, go for the next, go for the next, go for the next. And, really taking a beat to say, do you want that next thing, right? Like so many in-house lawyers, right, say, oh yeah, I want to be a GC, got to be a GC, need to figure out how do we get me to GC?
Mm-hmm.
And when you really sit down and unpack it with them and you kind of unpack what it means to be a GC, which by the way, there's only one at every company, so those jobs are hard to come by, right? People are like, oh, I don't want to do that. Well, I don't want to do that. Well, okay. So you want the title, or you've got this sort of idea of what success looks like. If you're at the top of the mountain peak, you must be successful. There's all this stuff down here in the next level or the next level down where you'd be perfectly happy, right? You'd be leading the department of your particular subject matter of law in a company and be happy as a clam.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's it. But again, right, like people are putting something on, or they're just sort of swallowing again, sort of other people's definitions of what success looks like. So I think, again, it's all about, you have to be true to yourself. And I know that sounds repetitive and silly and simple, but so many people don't do that. They don't take the time, or they feel so much pressure not to. I work with, I do work with a lot of lawyers of color, particularly women of lawyers of color, but the even within some of those groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of the divide between, like, if you look at Black women lawyers of color, right?
Yeah.
The ones who are Black, like African American, sort of, coming down, descended from descendants of slaves who were brought over, right, in the slave trade, versus Black women lawyers who their family may be more recent to the Americas, in sort of like an immigration, kind of scenario, right?
Yeah.
I hear very different pressures from those populations, right? The people who coming over, in more of like an immigrant way, that's how they got to this country. The pressure is
real.
Tripled, right?
It is real,
right? Somebody came over,
it's real,
and slept on auntie's couch for 3 years, so they could bring you, the amount of guilt those people feel and pressure to, all their people know is, I cleaned whatever I needed to clean, so you could go to school. You better get that top job, whether you want it or not.
Yes.
So again, people sort of understanding what they bring with them, and I call it a picnic basket. Like, you've got all this stuff in your picnic basket. Just taking 2 seconds, and you don't need a coach to do this, but it helps. Unpack that, right? Look at everything in your picnic basket that makes up who you are and why you think you want the things you do, and why you are the way you are, and why you strive the way you strive. And look at it all and really critically evaluate whether all those things still belong in your basket, or somebody else put them there, right? Are there olives in your basket and you don't really like olives, but you've been carrying this heavy jar of olives around for what?
Yeah.
Right? And if you look at all of it and say, nope, this is all me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I believe all this. Pack it right back up.
And so be it, right?
That's your chance to take out the olives, if the olives don't work for you.
I love that reflection, and I want to bring in I don't think there's a better or worse way of being anyway. It's all who we are and what we bring to the table. But I heard you loud and clear. I was like, me, because my family is from Jamaica and Barbados. And my grandma, like, I remember being like, oh my goodness, like, entrepreneurship is in my blood. My grandmother was like, I'm selling something, you're going to buy it, because I got to get to the right. It is what it is. And I don't think that folks who are, from the Americas, et cetera, have different goals, but there's the recency of it. I think just prompts so much of the you gotta. And I see this amongst immigrant populations, period, but women of color or not, but I do think it shapes up in a different way where, like I tell my daughter, I'm like, you stand on the shoulder of every single person who got you here. And that's a heavy pressure. And even as I say it, I'm like, and yet it's also very, very true that to squander all of the blessings that have come to you doesn't work. However, that doesn't mean that you have to do what I tell you to do. Right? I'm very strong about that. You still need to choose and understand that you have agency, right? And that you get to decide, and also with the knowledge of that people have sacrificed to get you agency.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, agency and choice. I do
Yeah.
think that's the gift,
Yes.
right? That's the legacy.
Yeah.
That's the generational gift.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I think for people, maybe more in our generation, I might be a little bit older than you, Paula,
Mm-hmm.
but the that it's, there was a little bit of more of an imposition for folks who's, they were first generation or whatever, right? So there was more of an imposition of like, it's doctor, lawyer, engineer if you're lazy, right? Like, like we have like 4 jobs you're allowed to have, right? Like
Engineer if you're lazy.
sacrifices for you to like be an artist, okay?
Right. Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
so I like to see folks like you who
Mm-hmm.
you can acknowledge what it was, you can acknowledge the gift
Mm-hmm.
and the sacrifices that were made. You can
Mm-hmm.
also acknowledge the extraordinary pressure under which you came up and
Yes.
know that that's the piece of the cycle you want to break, not the whole thing, right?
Right.
You don't want to have
Right.
your kids not acknowledge all the sacrifices, but that one piece is the piece that you'd like to sort of surgically remove before you pass it on. I think that's lovely.
100%. So in thinking about, again, no matter when anybody hears this episode, there's probably a pivot, right? And if it's one
Mm.
that they are anticipating, are there some things that you would recommend for your clients and you work with them about how to think about their next step, your career step, strategically, proactively, as opposed to, I always say, try to make it things happen to things versus them happen to you, but life will life, right? So, but if they have agency to be able to shape, what are some of the things that you coach folks to do to prepare for whatever that pivot might be?
Yeah, I think one of the first things is to expand your network in your circle, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can't just keep talking to the same 5 people. You can't just keep talking to the same people, even if you talk to 100 people. If they're all in your industry or they're all in your profession, you're probably going to start to get a very sort of linear way of thinking, right? And in order for you to be, I think, best prepped for pivot, to feel the most resilient, to have confidence in your ability to engage in different areas, you need to get a little more jungle gym with that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you
Like
need to
that.
go lateral and you need to talk to people in different areas. And I think a nice way to do that is you might find some point of commonality, right? Whatever it is. It could be, hey, you kind of plug into some sort of network, let's say at your church, right? And maybe there's a women's network or there's a Black women's network or there's I don't
Insert network here.
there's a network, right? But there's some sort of a network that there's sort of like a loose affinity.
Yeah.
But in that setting, you're going to be getting people from a wide swath of different backgrounds, right? And somebody
Mm-hmm.
could say something, or you could say something that sparks something in them and says, "Oh, you know who you should talk to," right? And you're just stretching your network in different ways. So I think flexing that way. And I'll say this, you and I have met on several occasions at a
Mm-hmm.
jillion conferences.
Yes.
Um, I am an introvert, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people don't believe that when I tell them that. I am an introvert and I like to talk, I like to meet new people. I do. I really love it. I love to have deep conversations.
Mm-hmm.
But I do find it like exhausting, right? Like everybody who wants to go out after the day of the conference, I'm like, I'm just going to crawl into bed and put the robe on and order room service and I'll see you all tomorrow, right? So sometimes people who are more introverted struggle and think, well, I'm not good at networking, or it's just like it's so awful. You don't have to go and high five everybody and shake every hand. You might find 2, 3 people at an event that you sit down and you have like more of a deep conversation. It goes beyond, let's talk about the weather and what do you do and how many kids do you have or whatever, right?
Yep.
You might have a surprisingly deep connection. Making 2 or 3 deep connections to me beats making 10 surface connections any day. Those people are going to remember you afterwards when you reach back out to them and say, "Hey, really enjoyed, chatting. Can we, set some time up?" Or you mentioned your friend John who's working in XYZ and you thought maybe, he and I could have an interesting conversation. Still
Mm-hmm.
willing to make that connection. They're going to remember you. So I think you can network and expand yourself in that way, no matter
Oh,
how you're built.
I agree. I actually think introverts, to your point, are much better at networking, the strategy of it and the acting of it. I think of myself because I think we all know that I'm an extrovert, right? I'm like a butterfly. I'm going to talk to every flower, 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 right? But the folks who are like, I'm going to talk to the blue flower, the green flower, and the red flower, and then that's it, are to that point are making those deeper connections, and those are the ones that stick. And it's why I like having the podcast, because so often people will be like, I feel like I know you. I'm like, you do. You hear me speak every week. You listen to my podcast, right? Like you have a better understanding. And so I feel a benefit of having light touches and be like, hey, you can listen to my podcast. If you want to know all that I think about all the things, you can probably find an episode that includes that in there. What is something that you want to tell folks, and maybe you have been seeing recently or just in general, to do more of X and less of Y, period. What might that be?
I would say do more giving and do less taking.
Okay.
So
Yes.
I was just at a conference, and I was one of the panelists, and we did something called the ask and offer. It's
Ask and
actually
offer.
inspired by you.
Yes.
And so don't be afraid to ask for things, right? But there's a difference between asking and taking, right? There's a difference between it being really one-sided and not having an offer on the back of that to say, whatever it is, things that we take for granted, right? And I would like people to do that. Take stock of all the things you have to offer and don't assume that they're not worth anything just because they come easily to you, right? I think people sit in that a lot. Again, we talked about lawyers assimilating information very quickly, and that's not a skill that everybody has, right? You may do something on a very regular basis. You bake amazing cookies. I don't know, everybody bakes cookies. No, they don't.
No, they don't.
So if you say, hey, my ask is, your ask was about, a TED Talk, right? And say, somebody might know, and then say, hey, Paula, I heard you bake amazing, scotcheroos or whatever. That was a really interesting reference for somebody who's never made a scotcheroo.
I'm like, to everyone, I bake nothing.
Yeah, no. Okay, chocolate chip cookies, and that's all they want from you, right? Just that's the little gifty they would love from you, right? And it builds community. It means that we're turning inward and we're taking care of each other, which I think is very nice, and that can feel very comforting. Particularly, we talked about networking. Sometimes people just don't have a network, right? And so you feel very alone at your company. You might feel very alone geographically where you live, right? So I would also encourage people, find other ways to get out and build different kinds of community, even if they're people who you meet at a conference and you have a lovely time and you're all sort of scattered across the country. That's okay, right? You start a little WhatsApp chat or whatever, you just keep it going. It's somebody you can bounce an idea off of and get out of your own head.
I love that. So I ask everybody who comes on the podcast the same 3 final questions. So number 1, because I'm nosy, is what do you do for fun, Nina?
Ooh, I cook. So I make something that my friends, I guess lovingly call garbage soup. Yeah. I love to cook lots of different things. I also love to bake, which again, it's just why scotcheroos was a weird flex. But I do love to make soup. So one of my fondest memories is my maternal grandmother and I. We were very close, and she would watch us sometimes. And one time she's like, "We're going to make." She called it refrigerator soup, and I was like, What's that?" And she's like, "Oh, we just take whatever's in the refrigerator, and we're just going to make soup out of it." And I was transfixed, like I could not believe that. And then and then we ate it, and I had helped her, right? And they've shown like that when kids participate in making a meal, they're more likely to eat it because they feel like invested and proud. And I was super proud of this soup that we'd made, but I was also like, what sorcery is this? Right. Like, so I like to cook. I do not enjoy when people waste food. So I save things in my many freezers and just throw things in pots and make delicious soup. And I give it to my friends and their kids. And now their kids are like, when's Auntie Nina coming with the garbage soup? So
I'm going to just put a little mark there and say that I'm going to ask.
That's going to be your ask.
To bring some soup.
That is my perpetual offer to you, Paula. Always garbage soup.
No, love it. Okay. So, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Stand by your brand. What is something that you will never compromise about your personal brand?
Telling the truth. I will never compromise on telling the truth. Unfortunately, I think we live in a time where people are feeling pressure to be silent.
Yes.
Yeah. My socials don't really reflect that for me. A thing is still a thing. Yeah. Even if somebody wants to intimidate you or wants to try to gaslight you into thinking that it's not a thing. Yeah. And I've been in relationships where I've been, gaslit in my life. It's important to call a thing, to tell the truth, and to shine light in places where there is none, so that people can feel connected and healed.
Yes to all of that. And also yes to the reflection on that one guy who gaslit me. But anyway, okay, so
always a guy.
Always a guy. It is what it is. So branding room only is a play on the term standing room only. Again, because I'm clever.
You're
So,
very clever.
so that part. What is something that people would be in a room with only standing room only to experience about you?
So I have a something I like to say, which is my love language is helping you discover your own power. And I think that's what it is. I want people to walk away feeling that I brought them in, I made them feel seen, heard, included, and I, in some small way, even if it was just an hour webinar, I gave them a little spark to say, wait, I might have more power inside me than I thought before I talked to her or I listened to her. So I think that's the brand.
Love that. And I feel that alignment as well for that. So I feel heard, I feel seen by you, and I want to know how people can see and find you. So, how can people see and find you, Nina?
So they can go to my website, which is www.ninablackshear.com. And I offer coaching, group and individual. I work with corporations and organizations to do webinars and workshops. And I also do keynote speaking. So feel free to go check me out. I wrote all the copy on my website myself. So it gives you a very good idea of what you're getting. If you've listened to this, you've also got a good idea of, how I am and how I operate. But that voice on that website is all mine. So would love if anybody wanted to reach out, see how we could work together and see what's next for them.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you for joining me today. I knew this conversation was going to go by quickly. All of you, tell everybody who you know needs to hear the conversation we had today about being more authentic, owning and figuring out their values, having self-awareness, all of the things, and make sure you share, download, and in general, stand by your brand, please. Y'all. Okay. Talk soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.